Before we get into today's video, I want to announce that there is a free Crush Live Poker podcast available on all the major podcast platforms. Just head over to a place like Apple's Podcasts or Spotify and search for free Crush Live Poker podcast, and you will get to hear best of parts of the subscription podcast that we put out on a weekly basis over on crushlivepoker.com. And do me a favor, if you do like this podcast, give it a rating and maybe even write a review. It would be a big, big help.
Middle position, MP2.
Okay.
And I'm in the big blind.
Okay.
He opens to 20.
Okay.
And I have ace-5 of hearts, and I choose to defend in the big blind.
And you guys are 1,000 deep, is that right?
Yeah, 1,000 effective.
Okay. So ace-5 suited is one of these sort of primary pre-flop bluffing types of hands. So, I mean, here's the thing. Like in the big blind when no one else calls in between, I think I would probably do less squeezing and more calling with sort of in-between hands. So I think calling here is fine. Sometimes you can mix in some 3-betting, but if he had opened and somebody had called, that would lend itself to a squeeze. But okay, you decide to just flat call here. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I had played, like I said, I played that 1-4-bet pot with him where I did like a major 4-bet bluff with ace-10 suited. But this hand, it was just me and him, so I stopped it to complete.
Okay.
So flop comes queen of hearts, 10 of hearts, 3 of hearts.
So you flop the nut flush.
Yeah, right.
You flop the nuts here. Queen 10-3, all hearts. It's a 2-5 game, so you're playing 200 big blinds effective. I remember this email because I have my own thoughts sometimes about the nut flush. So, all right, Queen 10-3, all hearts. Yep.
Yep. And I decided just because of our prior history and how aggressive he's been and just his overall kind of like attitude, like I said, I kind of felt like he thought he was like a superior player to most people at the table. I decided to try to play this one a little more trappy than I normally would. So I checked to him because I was the big blind and he's middle position, and he bets 25. And then I opt to just call.
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts about this. I mean, I know that you just gave sort of a little bit of background that he's, maybe he's going to have a little bit of a higher bluffing frequency than, like a normal person in this game. This really goes back to like one of the really old sort of first concepts that I put out. It's really one of my first tweets actually ever that applies to sort of lower stakes live games, which is sometimes if you want to maximize when you flop the nut flush, fast playing is actually the way to go. And there's a couple of thoughts on this. The obvious ones, of course, is that there can be action card killers that can come, although you block those because, now there are 5 hearts that are out. I think that people will sometimes pot control monotone boards, like sometimes checking back without a heart, like an overpair or something like that. And I don't necessarily think that this board is one that people will just barrel. The other interesting thing here too, the newer school thought, is that the primary sort of hand that people might barrel with in a spot like this might be the ace of hearts. And of course, because you have the ace of hearts in your hand, he can't have that. So, really in ultra low stakes, and I played a session actually at TCH where I had to wait to get into the 2-5 game. This was not on a stream, so I was playing 1-2 300 cap. And it kind of brought me back to some of these lower stake concepts. And I'm going to be putting out a 2-part episode about sort of a Bible of how I think you should beat low stakes. But fast playing hands is a deceptive way to get more money in the pot. No one will ever really think that you actually have it. And it's just it kind of really sucks. Now you're out of position too, so that's another disadvantage. But when you put heat on somebody past the flop, like on the turn around the river, what can happen is on a monotone board or when a flush comes in, when you put the raise in, the only response you'll get from other big hands is just to go into a check call shell. Meaning like if you check raise turn here or, check raise river and someone might have like another flush, even the king high flush, they're only going to call. Whereas if you put money in early on, you might see a reflection of a 3-bet. I always think about that too when I'm in position and I flop the nut flush, someone bets and I raise right away. you get a lot more action on the flop. If I wait till the turn, king high flush just basically goes into a check call shell. That's my thoughts on low stakes flopping the nut flush. I actually think that sometimes you will win the most amount of money by fast playing it. The higher stakes you go up, I mean, obviously I can see a check call here. The issue is of course you're out of position. So if you check call and the turn goes check, check, you know, you're going to bet the river and maybe the guy calls. If you go try to get really tricky with it, he might just check it back again. So those are really kind of my thoughts. So he bets 25 and you call. So the pot is $90 now. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So probably not, but any ever merit to leading the flop? Probably no, right?
Well, I would tend to do some leading more in a multi-way type of scenario, but I will say you bring up a good point. Another thing that I'm going to be putting out is that it's an exploitable unbalanced line to lead with only strong hands in a given scenario. And that might be fine in a game where you might not have bluffs. It's just the best way to get the most amount of money. And the only thing about leading here is that it's almost never going to be responded with a raise. So it's only just going to be bet call, especially with you having the ace of hearts. So I don't mind going for a check raise here to get more money in the pot. You know, check calling sometimes fine too, but probably not going to lead here, as opposed to maybe leading into 3 or 4 people when the board comes out, you know, like 7-4-3 and you flop the nut flush or something like that.
Right. And I was like thinking back on this, I was thinking that I also kind of showed him a hand where I got out of line versus him. So that kind of would help my image if I did decide to check raise here on the flop. Like he wouldn't think I'm like nitty. He would think I do have the potential to do it with a bluff. So I do think it might have been better to raise here.
Okay. So
anyway,
what's the turn?
The turn comes a 6 of clubs.
Okay. So not an action card killer, obviously.
Yeah. Pretty blank.
Yeah.
I checked to him, still trying to go with my original plan of being pretty trappy. And he decides to bet 70.
Well, it's good that he doesn't check back. So MP2 bets 70. Now, before you tell me what you're going to do, it sounds to me like you want to play this hand trappy. But again, the issue here is that a lot of things, if you choose to just call, a lot of things are really kind of going against you in this hand. Because again, the river might pair the board, might bring another heart out, might bring a scare card in, even some straightening cards like king or a jack that you might be able to get more value from here on the turn without that card coming at the end. And he might just check it back. And then when you go check, call, check, raise on the river, even if you were to get that in, it's literally like the most unused, underbluffed line. And, you know, your primary bluff being like a hand like with the ace of hearts, and a lot of people might be paired with the ace of hearts or just call down with ace high as opposed to check raise. It just is so strong. So if I played it like this, I would definitely start putting money in for those reasons.
So if I choose to check raise, what hands could you expect him to continue with? Maybe like king, queen with the king of hearts, or like.
Well, yeah, I mean, he might, and this is why I like a check raise on the flop, because I think that some of the hands that actually might be what you would think might be big folds at this level, like maybe an over pair with no heart, ace, queen, king, queen, aces, kings with no heart, you're going to get called on the flop, whereas he might start to piece some of those hands off here, you know, on the turn. But I definitely think you need to start building the pot up here. I mean, you're going to check call and check the river. I'm just not a huge fan of it. But did you check call here on the turn?
Yeah, I did want to check calling.
I mean, I'm sure. I assume you understand where I'm going with this, right? For those reasons.
No, I do.
Yeah,
I do. The only reason why I played it this way was because I thought, because of our history and just the way he was playing and his overall attitude, that he would be more inclined to triple barrel just to kind of, I don't know, almost get me back, or just because he feels like he's above the game kind of. So I thought that he would just try to like muscle me out. So I was trying to bring him along, because I felt like any point if I were to check raise, the hand just over, and I'm not going to get any more value.
I mean, here's the thing though. I mean, the board is not super low, so he's going to have a fair amount of these high cards in there. That's number one, whether it's, you know, a queen, a 10, ace, king, whatever it is. And I would take more of that line as a trappy line on a much more dynamic-ish type of board. Now, people might say that this is a dynamic board, but what I mean by that is like, say, flopping a set of nines on 9 deuce 3, where he can represent overcards, and if he doesn't have anything, actually run into top pair. This one, I suppose he could triple barrel on monotone board like this, putting you just on the ace of hearts or the king of hearts. But I think if you run this scenario over and over and over again, you will just need to get lucky that he'll have a hand to call down with, and going for max value is going to return more than going to try to bluff catch somebody triple barreling on a monotone board.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
All right, so 230 to the river.
Okay, river is the 9 of diamonds.
Okay.
Which is a pretty good card. It does give like another combination of value that I could try to go after. He's got like it could be King Jack. He could have that.
Yeah, but it also creates a scenario where a hand like, especially one without a king in it, aces, ace, queen, whatever it is, would have bet at the end, and now monotone board, he might think you've been sandbagging a flush, which you have been, and now another combo of draw comes in the form of King Jack. So it's definitely not the cleanest river, as opposed to like a deuce.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So anyway, I continue with my plan. I decided to check again, one last time, expecting him to triple barrel, hoping he triple barrels, and he does. He bets 165.
I mean, the only thing that can be said here too, just at a more advanced level, is if you were holding on somehow with the King of Hearts that had no showdown value, that probably wasn't paired, which is kind of rare, because even like while calling here in the big blind, this is the key to hand reading. It's like on this run out, what King X offsuit are you calling with here that gets to the river that's unpaired, that needs to turn it into a bluff, if you're not calling like King 8 off, King 7 off. So sometimes people miss that on monotone boards, because even in the field, people don't even have that many offsuit aces. I mean, when somebody puts pressure on you and you're trying to find the bluffs, they actually have to have an offsuit hand. So, you know, having the King of Hearts here, maybe somebody runs a bluff because you block some King Jack, but again, it's really hard to be unpaired. So unless you were turning like King 10 off into a bluff with the King of Hearts, it's just, you know, it's one of those things. But obviously you have to raise here. You know what I mean? I mean, I would tend to sort of go at least 3x here. I mean, he bet 70 on the turn, 165 on the river, 25 on the flop. So it looks like you guys have about 800 left. So I mean, I would probably go at least 500 to 600, you know, something like that. If you think you've got, you know, this dynamic, I suppose you could shove all in for 800. But again, it's just such an underbluff spot. That's why I like to get money in earlier in this hand.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. And that's I thought all in would be like just way too much. I didn't think that there's no way he'd call that. And like I said, I didn't really put him on anything too strong just because of our dynamic. So I only raced the 400, which I think, like you said, is a mistake. I need to be going bigger.
Okay. I mean, that might guarantee some calls because of the fact that he's going to be getting great, you know, pot odds at this point. It would be 395. I mean, it would be 800-ish, like 135 for him to call, 235 to him to call. So he's getting great pot odds. But okay, so you raised to 400.
Yeah, and then he snaps it off, and my heart sinks when he shows King of Hearts, 6 of Hearts.
Wow. So like he flopped the second nut flush, and you didn't get all his money. You got only half of his stack with the nut flush, playing it this way here. And you were really lucky that he had the king high flush. I think like a lot of times this just gets checked back. For him, it's interesting here too, because I think he has a decision. Like I wouldn't just snap call. If I were him, I would look at the specific combo in my hand and figure out if I might want to 3-bet all in here, right? I mean, obviously he loses to all combos of ace-x. He has king 6 out there, so you would have to have like the jack high flush here, flopping the jack high flush, flopping like some other smaller flush. I would probably tend to call here as well if I were him, even with the second nut flush, because I think that players at this level are much, much more likely to fast play off a smaller flush, which would be the jack X or below. And it would not really be reflected with this line of check, call, check raise with a smaller flush. And especially with you know, probably calling with all ace X suited. There's many ace high flushes. So if I were him, I wouldn't have snap called. I would have thought about possibly 3-betting, but then probably would have just made the call. Again, it's just a scenario where I think you're actually lucky that he has the king high flush, but you easily would have got all the money in, earlier on. But it is what it is.
Yeah, learning experience. Thanks,
All right.
Bart. Appreciate the analysis.